Good evening. Welcome, everybody, to our first Mebkin Abbey Forum on Contemplative Ecology. It's a real blessing to have you all here this evening, and I'm honored to help facilitate this evening's program. And I hope that we'll be hearing from Father Garrick Heckel in a moment, as soon as he is able to log on. But in the meantime, I just wanted to express my gratitude to the entire Mebkin Abbey community, and especially to Brother Kyle Burko, who, as many of you knew, had the vision to create this forum on contemplative ecology and to live out the spirit of Laudato Si and this deep sense of care for creation that we hope to embody and celebrate this evening. So I just wanted to say a special word of gratitude and blessings to Brother Kyle, who is with us this evening in spirit, and whose warm heart and deep love for creation animates our gathering here this evening. So I'm going to allow, if Father Garrick is able to join, he can feel free to come in at any time.
He's in the meeting, but he's having difficulty with his audio. So we're just going to let you take it from here.
Sure. Well, special thanks, of course, to Father Garrick for the invitation to be here this evening. And if he's able to figure out the technical side, I hope he'll join in and offer his warm wishes to you all from Mebkin. So I thought we would start this evening with a poem that was actually released this morning from Beth Norcross's Center for Spirituality in Nature, because I thought it would be a fitting introduction to our wonderful guest speaker this evening, with whom I have the pleasure of being in dialogue. And this poem comes from Rowan White. An expression of faith in life herself is to sow seeds into dark soil, not knowing what awaits, returning to the patience, reverence, grace, humility practiced by our ancestors. Who knew how to feed the hungers of time that call down the rains with a simple song? It is those kinds of people whose memory courses through my veins like wild rivers, reminding me to wake up amidst the confusion, to do what must be done to feed the children, to tuck vibrant seeds into fertile soil and patiently tend the garden, back bent in service, to those whose faces look up at us from the well-worn path we walk. The garden that our ancestors left for us is beautiful. May we water it well with our tears and our laughter, our stories and our songs. Today, I choose to plant seeds of hope into the winds of an unknown future. May we grow from this tiny seed of remembrance, this intimate immensity, coming totally apart, emerging out of the hard shell of generations of protection and prayer, a seed coat tempered by love and loss, joy and pain, completely coming undone to reorient to this new form. It's a new dawn, the time to be those ancestors our grandchildren are waiting for us is upon us. What seeds are you sowing? Before you begin, I invite you into a contemplative silence, to ground into this moment together. Well, thank you again for being here, everybody. And it is my great honor to introduce our guest for this evening, Beth Norcross. And with extensive training and experience in both theology and ecology, Beth founded and directs the Center for Spirituality in Nature. She speaks, writes, and leads numerous programs that offer spiritual guidance for developing deep, sustained, loving relationships with nature. Beth has developed a number of educational resources, including a spiritual study of the Ken Burns film, The National Parks, America's Best Idea, and the popular 6-week video series, The Spiritual Wisdom of Trees, with Leah Rampey. She also wrote our 2 popular spiritual guides, Inside Out, Practices for Going Deeper in Nature, and Start Singing, How to Form Your Own Spirituality in Nature group. To help integrate spirituality in nature into theological education, Beth co-founded the Green Seminary Initiative, and as adjunct professor at Wesley Theological Seminary, has created numerous classes, including one on spirituality in nature and ecojustice. After receiving a BA in mathematics from Duke and a Master of Forestry degree, Beth worked for the U.S. Senate National Parks and Forests Subcommittee and as Vice President for Conservation in American Rivers. She then pursued further education in ecotheology, earning a Master of Theological Studies from Wesley Seminary and a Doctor of Ministry degree in eco-spirituality, with a dissertation focused on the national parks as sacred ground. Beth has 3 grown children and lives with her husband in Arlington, Virginia. She delights in exploring nature while hiking, kayaking, and skiing. She also loves listening to music and singing, as well as playing a variety of sports. Beth finds particular inspiration and guidance from slow walks in nature with her 5 grandchildren. Beth, thank you so much for being with us here this evening.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. I got particular inspiration from some of those grandgirls this weekend. So hopefully that'll give me even more wisdom to impart.
I'm so happy to hear you had some quality time in the emerging spring, Beth, with your grandkids. And, as we open up our conversation this evening, we'd love to hear a little bit more about your journey and particularly your movement from working with environmental action into this deepening sense of eco-spirituality that you have oriented your life and your vocation around. Can you tell us a little bit more about what has animated you to do this work?
Sure. Well, let me first say how privileged and proud and pleased I am to be with you all tonight. There are a couple of familiar faces. Hi, Wendy. So it's nice to see out there, and of course yours. I'm really quite. It's quite an honor to be with this this new community and to be with you even through the Zoom. I'd rather be walking in the woods. I'm guessing that you all would be as well. So in terms of that journey, I did start out, as you said, and thank you for the glowing introduction, in the environmental community, working for American Rivers. And like so many activists, I tried, very hard to do my part to protect the earth, and in this particular case, and protect rivers. As many of you are, I was an avid nature buff, hiker, birder, so forth and so on. But eventually I got a little burnout, as I'm sure many of you have. And so I was looking for something a little less political and a little less complicated. So I chose church work. So as all of you, yes, you're laughing. I'm glad to see that you're laughing at that, because that is in fact the case. So I left, and it felt to me also that we were trying to make intellectual arguments. And I know that the environmental community has done superb work, but it seemed quite to be oriented toward our heads, convincing people that if they just could understand the gravity of the situation, they would change their lives and lifestyles. And as we know, we haven't been able to make the kind of change that we all across this screen want. And so I went to seminary in hopes of finding a different path. And more I was called back to this earth work, because for those of you who've been to seminary know that every single class is a class on creation on earth, be it the Hebrew Bible or the letters or even church history. And with the mystics, it's all about grounding our faith first and foremost in the natural world. So I started, as you said, as you suggested, working at that intersection of faith and ecology. And so now we had the moral high ground, right? We were going to not just make head arguments, we were going to make moral and ethical arguments. And again, gosh, the faith and ecology community is doing such superb work. But it felt to me through all that, starting of the Green Seminary Initiative with a couple of colleagues, and working with Interfaith Power and Light and some other faith-based activist organizations, it felt to me like something was missing. There was a grounding, there was a foundation, there was something that, again, the arguments were moral and ethical, but it felt still too heady. So it felt like there was at least a gap. And so I slowly began taking people outside. We just did these very casual spiritual walks. And people really not only enjoyed them, but they connected with earth in a new way. And they connected with spirit, God, mystery, whatever names you have for it, differently. And we got to, a few colleagues and I got together, and we started doing these walks together. And the next thing you know, there's a 501c3, and the thing just kind of got out of hand. The idea was that we're not going to be able to make the kind of change that we all seek unless we begin relating differently to earth, to the creation. And that is to learn to not only love it, but to find our deepest selves there as we connect our deepest self with the deepest aspects of the created order. And it's that connection that we have been seeking and encouraging through resources and walks and talks and classes and so forth for the last 10 years. We're soon up on our 10th anniversary. My sense is, and our sense is, that there's something foundational about engaging with earth in, I was going to say new ways, but actually it's the oldest possible way of seeing God, seeing spirit enmeshed with us and earth. And I've seen it now, it's so exciting as we've gotten to know people who've gotten to know Earth differently, who've gotten to know Spirit differently. We've seen the changes that they've made. They're putting solar panels up and planting native plants because they come at it out of love, out of relationship with both Earth and Spirit. So that's a quick but long path, description of my path through how I got to this. It felt like that there's been a hole that we're at least trying to fill, and so many others are working in that same garden hole, such as yourselves in the last several years as well.
Beautifully said, Beth, and thank you for sharing a glimpse into your life story and your vocation of guiding people into these encounters with the more than human and the sense of metanoia or ecological conversion that can spur all sorts of regenerative action. And I'm really struck as well by the primacy of experience in your biography and speaking about, the way that it is our faith, our spiritual practice that allows for the outward action and activism. I know Richard Rohr has written about, if activists lack kind of spiritual depth, they are so prone to burn out, right? If we don't have that wellspring. And so on that vein, I know you are doing some programs around ecological anxiety and especially the grief many people feel around the climate crisis or biodiversity loss. And I'm curious how you feel that these experiences can help provide hope, as you said, or how nature might be a model of resilience for us in our engaged ecological spirituality.
Well, that's a big, expansive question, and as you know, Sam, my colleague and I, Leah Rampey, are just finishing up this book on the spiritual wisdom of trees. We have a chapter on resilience, we have a chapter on grief, we have a chapter on this because we think it's so very important. I'm really glad you raised that. We were honored to take 25 national climate and faith activists to the Maine woods last year. And when they came to us, they were downtrodden, they were bereft, they were exhausted, and we led them through a number of spiritual practices. We asked that they delight in the natural world, and then we moved them into lament and grief practices. And it was very moving to watch. And we all have this opportunity too. We asked them to find something in the more than human world that was hurting, that had suffered, that had challenges. And so they came back to us with a number of different experiences. Some found, a tree that had fallen down. Others were in conversation, with a squirrel whose tail had been, extracted, or those kinds of things. But that notion of bringing your grief into the natural world, into the more than human world, and asking them to hold it with you. As we grieve for the earth, we tend to hunker down within our own species. And we asked them to write lament psalms for the earth or lament psalms with the earth. And it was so incredibly powerful. As one of them said, that nature had become the wallpaper that she looked at out her window while she was busily saving the earth on her computer. So this notion of actually mourning, mourning, mourning and grieving with earth is an extremely powerful thing. And then, you raised the issue of resilience. Because I've been writing about trees, I'll talk a little bit about that. Trees have been around for 350 million years. They're survivors. One of the texts I read said, if you wanted something that's going to survive, the tree is your answer. And they figured out a few things about how to deal with challenges, how to deal with storms, how to deal with human intervention, how to deal with landslides and imposing tidal activity on the trees near the coast. They have gone through it all, and yet they've figured out how to adapt, how to be resilient, and how to be accepting, how to be adaptive and accepting. I was on a walk this morning, and I went to my this favorite little spot I have, and there's an old maple tree, and boy, it's seen some stuff, right? It's bent over, and some of its branches are missing, but it's still it's still surviving. It's still figured out a way to get by, and that brings it brings our participants so much hope that somehow we're going to get through this. And the more than human world can be our leaders. They can show us the way. And one more thing I'll say about hope, because it's the question that we're asked the most. Do you have hope? It always confuses me a little bit, because I always wonder if what the questioner is asking, do I hope that we'll go backwards? No, I don't think that's possible. I'm not sure we would want to anyway. Do I hope we'll survive? Do I have hope that we'll survive? Yes, I think in some form or the other. But I give them this example of what gives me hope. I'll tell you a little story, if I might, from the book. And I apologize if I'm hawking the book. It's very much on my mind because the edits are due in 10 days. So when my husband and I steward a property up in the mountains of the Blue Ridge. And when we first encountered it, bought the property, although we can have another conversation about whether you can buy property or not, it was a mess. There were trailers on it, and there was all sorts of damage that had been done to the property. So we took the trailers off, and we restored our vernal pond, and the tadpoles came back, and all this marvelous stuff happened. And then there was this one huge plot of grass that the former owner had had. And as we all know here, grass is not the best ground cover. It doesn't help anything. So we were going to do something about that, and we just ran out of steam. We ran out of steam, and the months went by, and we hadn't been up to the property. And we came up the drive, and we looked at what used to be grass, and there were the tiniest little Virginia pine trees popping up, and cedar. And just like the books, and when I learned in forestry school, those pioneer species, the ones that come in after disturbance, there they were. And in the intervening 10 or 15 years, these little tiny seeds of hope have grown into this marvelous grove with no intervention from us at all. And so what gives me hope is, I wonder what else is growing underneath the ground, outside of our sight, outside of our experience, just waiting to emerge. What is spirit collaborating with Earth? What do they have in store for us? That's not to say we shouldn't do everything we possibly can, because let's face it, we're the ones who messed it up. We owe it, right? But what gives me hope is there's so much going on beyond our knowing. Like that little grove, that little pine grove. What's out there? What's going to happen? What little miracles and magic are lying underneath the surface of our world and our experience. That was a really long answer to your questions. I could go on and on.
Well, I love that image of the undergrowth and what is germinating, and such an appropriate time of year to be reflecting on that. Just yesterday, I helped a friend who's organic farmer in upstate New York planting vegetables in a new greenhouse, and it was amazing to bring over. We hauled over this sheep compost that was incredibly fertile, and to see these little plantlings and all the incredible bounty of red wriggler worms and insects in the soil. And Dick Reisling, who's a friend and mentor, a longtime horse farmer, he said to me, the the bees and worms are the best farmers you can find. And it was such a experience of hope, I find. And I love your discussion, Beth, of trees. And I know many Native Americans have said that the plants are our oldest relatives, and I think you bringing us into this context of 350 million years is just astounding. And I had the chance last year with brother Kyle from Mebkin Abbey to walk the grounds, and I remember just marveling together at these incredible, enormous oak trees draped with Spanish moss, and this great sense of mystery suffusing those trees. And Beth, I would love to hear you talked a little bit about finding solace in these interspecies encounters and relationships. And I know Thomas Berry has this line, the longtime Passionist priest and cultural historian, where he says, the universe is a communion of subjects, not a collection of objects. And I'm curious to hear you speak a little bit more about how do we deepen that sense of relationship, that sense of meeting the plants, the animals in our lives as if they are our relatives, and how do we relate more deeply to the kind of animate and communicative world that we inhabit?
Well, thank you for that question. I might add that Martin Buber made very much the same point that Thomas did. And in terms of your abbey, before I answer your question, Thomas Merton, I have this lovely little book about it's called When the Trees Say Nothing, and he was really fretful and having a very hard time settling himself, and so the abbot maid asked him to be the abbey forester, and he was never any happier than when he was out among the trees. So another Thomas, another saint. In terms of the interspecies connections, it's an interesting question, and it's very easy to romanticize the other than human creatures. And so I'm gonna just call out, I hope I don't embarrass her. Wendy has lived in intimate connection. Can I say that, Wendy? Yeah, with the not for human world. It's beautiful and wondrous and unsettling and scary, and there's a lot going on that we need to acknowledge from our human perspective that we can't possibly understand or always appreciate. I told you I had the two grandgirls out in the woods, and they were all for it until there were bees and gnats and things like that. So they're part of our journey. They're part of our work to try to understand that part of the natural world that might be more difficult for us. There's a specific practice that I might introduce to you all, and it's a simple one, but I find it very helpful to get at this interspecies connection that you had suggested. And that is, we ask our participants to go out and wander around until you find something that attracts you, or probably more to the point, something finds you. And it could be a tree, it could be something that has some life in it. It could be a spider, it could be something. And we ask them to ask just this question: what's it like to be you? What's it like to be you? You could ask him or her. That's another way. Robin Wall Kimmerer prefers him, her, them, more of a personal rather than an it, back to your subject object. What's it like to be you? What do you eat? Where's home? Do you live with your family? What are you afraid of? Have I done anything to harm you? Those kinds of questions, inviting this experience of connection, of collaboration, of interrelationship. We've had a number of stories of people who have gone out and really had transformative experiences simply by asking that question. You can ask it again and again and again. Another thing that we do is that we go on micro hikes. You get down on your knees, and I know that's harder for some than others, or you sit on a chair and you get down and you look and you do a micro hike where you go maybe a foot in an hour. What's down there? What's living down there? Who's down there? Where do they live? What's life like for that individual? And then just recognizing our own humble place in the midst of this great, big, complicated world. And every time a fly bothers you, or bothers me, or a gnat, or a mouse, or a snake, or whatever, a gentle reminder: this is a fellow creature of the world. I don't always get every human I encounter. I don't necessarily get every gnat or snake or rat, or that's my particular thing I struggle with, rats. So those are just a couple of ideas. What's it like to be you?
Thank you, Beth. And I'm struck by that idea of a micro hike, and to bring our attention so fully into this microcosm, and in that microcosm to see an entire universe, like that William Blake line, to see infinity in a grain of sand.
Yes.
And I know you and I have spoken about our shared love for rotting logs.
Yes.
And as an amateur mushroom forager, I love finding rotting wood in the woods, and it really brings me out into my peripheries. I used to sort of just hike more from a linear sort of moving from A to B in the woods, but I do find that as I've gotten more interested in foraging and bird watching, especially during the migratory bird season here in Connecticut, I love to see all the processes of resurrection, the magical alchemical processes of as something as simple as a rotting log. And I'm curious to hear you reflect a little bit more to the group on, yeah, what your experiences of decay and rebirth in the woods, and what that has meant for you.
My experience with rotting logs. Well, first of all, in terms of your linear hiking, take a couple of young kids with you. I don't think they understand the concept of linearity, so all over the place. Let me just, as a matter of personal privilege, I'll tell you one story, and then I'll get back to your story about decay. I had my granddaughters out, and their mom and dad wanted to go on a hike. They had the dog. They had places to go, and of course the kids were stopping, and I was stopping, and there were mud puddles to jump in. I mean, and finally the mom, my daughter-in-law, said, "Come on, we've got to keep moving." And Lucy put her little hands on her. She was about 7 at the time. Put her little hands on her hip and said, "Mom, it's a nature walk. It's supposed to be slow." And I thought, I've gotten through. We'll see. So slow and moving around. The concept of the decaying log, the foresters call those nurse logs. And I love that term because I also love a good rotting log. And if you ever want to experience the resurrection right before your eyes, look at an old dead tree. There's a question in my mind whether there is really death in the natural world. Certainly, there's an official scientific cells stop dividing and so forth, but there doesn't seem to be any finality to it. If you look at that rotting log, you'll see saplings and you'll see moss and you'll see lichen. And if you carefully pull off the piece of the log, and of course we want to put it back, but the bugs and the termites and the little roly-polies and that are being serviced by death. And for me, I just again, probably might be just a tiny bit too personal, but when I was in seminary, I was really struggling with this concept of eternal life. What on earth does it mean? And I was reading the great books, and I was just so frustrated. I couldn't get my hands on it. Everybody had a different idea about it. But in the forest, eternal life makes total sense to me, because that log, after Sam gets done foraging for mushrooms and all the animals get done with it, and the grand girls get done jumping on it and so forth, it fully decays into soil, the substance of life. So, gosh, there is no finality. Everything is renewed and recycled and resurrected. And, if that's not eternal life, I don't know what is. And I hope that I'm not offending anyone who has other views on eternal life. I certainly am respectful of those. But this is something that I can see with my very eyes. And another, a really interesting concept is once that log decays, that nurse log completely decays, it's invisible. It's no longer present physically to us, but it's present in all that's around it. And a very cool thing happens sometimes, and maybe you all have seen these. A tree will grow up, a sapling will establish itself in this very fertile nurse log, and it will start to grow and grow and grow. And then the roots will form around. Have you seen that? Yeah. The roots will form around the tree like this, and then they'll get stronger and bigger. And the tree is growing, and then the tree starts to decay, but the roots are now big enough and strong enough that they can hold the tree up. So next time you're in the forest, look and see if you can find what they call a ghost tree, because the tree has disappeared into the soil, but it's invisibly being held. The new sapling with all these roots, can you picture that, is being invisibly held up by this tree, by this dead and gone tree. And it reminds me so much of all the saints that have gone before us, the people we love who've gone before us, that they're not physically present. We can't see them and touch them, but they're like, we're like the ghost tree that wraps around them and carries on, and we were formed by them and held by them, and now we're on our own, but they're always there with us. I don't know. There's so much interesting exploration to be done out in the natural world, as you all know, I'm sure.
Mm. I love that image of the ghost tree, Beth, and this reminder of being held and being tended to throughout our lives by, these, whether it's our parents or friends or grandparents, or the divine, this sense of our lives being contingent and always in that relationship, is such a powerful reminder. And
I might mention,
please,
do I have just a minute?
please.
I know you're trying to go on. One way also to be reminded of those interconnections is, every time you drink a glass of water, we might remember all of the critters and creatures that this water might have gone through, the roots of what trees, that they've held salamanders and frogs and all manner of different things. This comes from the Potomac River. Yeah, it's been cleaned up, but it's still gone through millions and millions of bodies. And goodness, if I take a sip and I close my eyes, I can feel the presence of not only spirit that animates all of that, but I can feel all of those critters and creatures who I am a part of. You asked how we do this. That's one way that I try to be reminded constantly that, I'm 60% water, which means 60% of me is all bound up in all that stuff that went through the water. And of course, the same is true of soil. So, yeah.
It's an amazing image. And I think about a breath of air as well, and the billions of molecules in just a single breath of air, and how that has been recycled through the trees, through the lungs of countless beings. And yeah, I think many of us, have been looking for these antidotes to loneliness and to this sense of togetherness. And I'm so glad you're bringing in these practices to really very tangibly deepen the sense of kinship, Beth. I would love, before we come to a close of the conversation part of our program this evening, if you could talk a little bit about a few of the programs that you are birthing in this new season. I know you're about to embark on a program on national parks. I think it starts tomorrow. I'd love to hear, and as well about the ongoing Spiritual Wisdom of Trees program. What programs and inspirations are stirring in you these days?
Well, thank you for that. We have a wonderful, very tiny team. You're looking at a third of the team here. Two wonderful staff people who put these programs together as well. We have a number of ongoing programs. They're all on our website, spiritualityinnature.org. We have a book study going this summer with my colleague Leah Rampey's book, Earth and Soul, which is a beautiful, beautiful book. And we have a program on forest bathing this summer. We're sending people doing a women's backpacking trip in a couple of weeks, and it feels like that because nothing beats being out there in the woods. And our young colleague Peyton Huygen I hopefully will do one for men, or we're a mixed group. But the two that you mentioned, the Spiritual Wisdom of Trees, we have a number of one-off programs, one-day programs, but these Spiritual Wisdom of Trees is a 6-week class. I don't know, maybe one or two of you have taken it. We offer it in the fall. Garrick, you've taken it? That's good to hear. We offer it in two forms. We do a 6-week live discussion of it and with these beautiful videos that our colleague Jane Pittman shot. And we just wander through the wisdom of trees, some of which I've given you some little hints about. And then we also offer that as a standalone, so you can take it anytime during the course of the year by yourself. And so tomorrow we're going to be re-releasing a program that I put together 15 years ago for churches. So it does tend to be, we work with a lot of churches, so we put together Christian programs, but a great deal of our audience is not affiliated with any particular religious organization. So the trees is more what I would describe as interspiritual. The parks program, funny story, if I have time someday, I'll tell you. I saw that. Do some of you remember Ken Burns' beautiful film on the national parks? Yeah, I see some nods. So when that was just being released, I happened to meet him and tell him how beautiful I thought his film was. And I really wanted to bring it into the spiritual realm. And he said, go for it. So I thought, okay, thanks. So they gave us beautiful clips. I spent a summer just going through this incredible film and picking clips. So this particular program, we're going to launch it tomorrow, but it is primarily a standalone 4 weeks of seeing what these beautiful clips can tell us about both the creator and the creation. It is Bible based, so if that happens to be your orientation, I would and even if it's not, it's awfully beautiful, and hopefully you can adapt some of the language and so forth. So that starts tomorrow, and then that's also on our website. And then I would just encourage you, people love our Monday Notes from Nature, from which Sam read, that's totally free. And we pop something in your email and on your Facebook every Monday morning to just orient you and get your week started in a earth-centered way. So I appreciate the ability to give a few plugs here. We also have a really lively social media presence where we do videos and reminders and blogs, and lots of video blogs. Just really quickly, Sam, you mentioned loneliness. I've done a number of video blogs over the last 10 years, and they'll get a couple thousand views and something like that. People like them or don't. I did one on loneliness last year, and it had 250,000 views so far. There's something very sad and difficult going on. I think people are feeling isolated and quite alone. And this idea that you could go out into the natural world and like John Muir did and say, I'm never alone out here. And that brings me to one last program that actually is, we spend a great deal of time forming spirituality in nature groups. We wrote a book about it. We do trainings twice a year. Peyton Hoig is our program director. He helps you form your spirituality in nature group, and then he will stay with you throughout quarterly meetings, Facebook groups, personal help when needed. And we have 35 of those now, formal ones spread throughout the nation, and then many, many more informal ones. And so that's a great way, if you're looking for some companionship, grabbing a friend and spending some time, some regular time out in the natural world. I know you're trying to get on to your next part of your program, so I'll stop.
That's okay. I could listen to you for hours, Beth, and so grateful to you for opening up these spaces for encounter and for togetherness, and I think you creating that video and these programs is a testament to all of our longing to feel more connected to beloved community, to feel, as Thomas Berry would say, we are returning to our native place in the earth community, and to really remember that each of us is intimately intertwined at every single moment. And
I read a poem recently, "The Homeland of Your Heart." I love that. The homeland of your heart.
Beautiful. I love that. Well, Beth, I wanted to thank you so much for being in dialogue with me this evening. And we are going to transition to the next part of our program, where I hope that folks will get a chance to reflect, and I'll also to ask some questions to Beth. But before we do that, I thought maybe we could hear from Father Garrick, who I'd love to, allow to, share a warm welcome and an introduction to the group.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry I wasn't able to get on the screen to welcome you, but I'm on the screen now to thank you for showing up and to participating in this inaugural Mepkin Abbey Forum for Contemplative Ecology. And so grateful to Sam, who's willing to coordinate these sessions, because I think well, for me, it's the direction I think our spirituality needs to move in these days, and to really create a loving kinship with creation, and anything we can do here at the monastery to support that, I'm all in, and thank you all for being part of it.
Thank you so much, Father Garrick, and really, inspiring vision from Brother Kyle, and through your leadership to help bring Brother Kyle's vision and his deep love for creation to life in and through this growing circle. So thank you again to you. And I'd love to ask Joy Christ from Mepkin Abbey, who is so kindly facilitating tonight's webinar, if she could please move us into breakout rooms. We're going to gather in groups of 3, and we just invite you for 10 minutes to have a chance to share what resonated with you from Beth's reflection. What is what are we giving voice to in our hearts and in our being that Beth maybe spoke to this evening? So if Joy could please break us up, we look forward to our discussions, and then coming back together at about 5 after the hour.
Absolutely. I've got all the breakout rooms set up for 3 people to be in there. But if when you get in your room, you discover that there are only going to be 2, don't feel like you have to wait. Go on and start your discussion. Because some folks may not join the room, and that's okay. So I'm going to open those up, and you'll get an invite on your screen, and all you have to do is click and enter.
Welcome back, everybody. I hope
Isn't that cool?
hello. I hope you had a fruitful discussion in your small groups. And we'd love to open up the floor to the community to raise anything that was shared or that was particularly memorable coming out of your small group discussion. And if we can have a chance for Beth to respond in kind to any ideas or if you had any questions that emerged. Feel free to raise your hand or to simply come off mute.
Melissa has a question.
I was really interested in finding out more about the possibility of taking a program to our church, and I didn't know whether that's something I should try to look into with Beth or whether directly to her website, but I just think that sounded like a wonderful opportunity, and I do want to pursue that. And I thank you so much, Sam, for having her this evening, and I look forward to the next time, but thank you so much for all of this.
Melissa, I'll just speak to that briefly. I'll put something in the chat as to how to get in touch with us. There are a number of our programs that are standalone programs that can be used in a group setting. In the National Parks program in particular, there's a group leaders guide and an individual guide, and they're quite different. So they, when I put that parks program together, it was meant to be used in churches. And that's we've adapted it so it can be used also by individuals, but it was meant as a group program. And then, you know, Peyton and I both can come into your church setting, either through Zoom or if you're nearby in person, to run a program for you or at least get you started. So I'm going to put my email and the web address in there, and then feel free to be in contact with me. I doing, you know, some retreat leading and so forth. Mostly I've got to finish after I finish the book. So good.
I can hardly wait for the book. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being willing to help. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
How do we get access to your Monday email?
I'm putting the website address on there, and you'll see in the right-hand corner an opportunity to join our mailing list, and it will give you the option of whether you want to have the Monday notes or not. They are on our Facebook page if you prefer that version of it. So you'll either get an email in your box, which I just kind of love. I got it this morning. Kate comes in really early. But also it just comes, it's on our Facebook every Monday. But I'm putting both my email address and the website address in the group chat.
I have a question. I was wondering how you define mercy or how you find mercy in nature. In terms of thinking about because I think something that's truly missing sometimes from our advocacy work in this day and age is mercy, and that's why we so deeply need that spiritual practice and that spiritual connection. And I wonder how you see that in nature.
Can you give me,
or how you've thought about that?
Not that word per se, but can you give me one line of what that means to you? And then I'll try to respond what the word mercy means to you.
It means openness. It means acceptance. It means forgiveness.
Yeah.
It means encompassing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, thank you for that question. I think in 10 years, that is the first time I've been asked that question. So, you know, openness, mercy, forgiveness, there are a lot, there's a lot going on in there. And I think at the crux of forgiveness, or at least one of the aspects of forgiveness, is acceptance of what is. And I think that's one aspect of the natural world, or the other than human part of the natural world. I like to think we're part of it, that I appreciate the most. You know, there's a striving in the human world, trying to be something we're not, something being better than better, envying that person who has a little more success, a little more love, whatever they have. This is an aspect of a small aspect of what you're saying. But I've never seen a white oak have a sense, you know what, gosh, if I could just be a red oak. Oh, their leaves are so pretty, you know. They get maybe a little taller than I do. So there's at the base of the human is the only species that I know of that strives, that doesn't accept, who they are and what they are. And we've all seen that three-legged dog who runs around, and she's just who she is, and that is a level of acceptance. Forgiveness, I'm going to have to give that some thought. I think it comes back to, in the natural world, the acceptance. I know that some species do learn to be afraid. That's a natural tendency for those who have predators. I don't know if any of you have been able to be on the Galapagos Islands, but I was so struck with the fact that the blue-footed boobies were just hanging out with their young right on the trail. They've never learned fear. So they don't, I don't know that they think about, any species really considers forgiveness, but I'd like to think about that. In terms of openness, that's, to me, one of the most beautiful things about spending time in the natural world, because these things, they keep us, we're constrained, we're constricted, and our thoughts and our worries and our concerns also keep us locked down, right? But the natural world, and in particular trees that we've been talking so much about, how do they get light? They reach, and if somebody gets in their way, gosh darn it, they're gonna move around it. Okay, this way. Nope. All right, something else comes up. Let me go that way. So there's an openness. I don't even, they're not conscious of it. They're open. They're open to the light. They're open to the dark. So perhaps that's an aspect of mercy. So much of what happens, important functioning happens underground in the dark. We can all learn from that. We avoid it. We have all these artificial lights and things. But spiritually, we avoid it too, don't we? One of the most profound things I've learned in spending time in the not other than human part of the earth is that they embrace dark, and they accept that they sometimes have to go light, and sometimes they need to go dark, and they need to go dormant, and they need to rest, and they need to lie on their roots, which are underground, doing all sorts of wonderful, magical things in the dark. Thank you. I think I talked around that more than I talked at it. So thank you, Elizabeth. You've given me some things to think about. Elizabeth to Elizabeth here.
I also have a three-legged cat, so now I have a wonderful example to think about now as I see her hopping around. So
It's remarkable.
I'm wondering if the whole theme of lament might be closely connected with the. Can you say anything about some lament rituals you've done it just seems to me that that's kind of an important ingredient of restoring our relationship.
Yeah, thank you, Father Garrick, for bringing that up. It goes along with some of the mourning and the grieving that we talked about, and the practice that we have found most helpful and most hopeful is to write a lament psalm. You know, there are, I don't know, how many psalms are there? 187, maybe? I should remember. Somebody who remembers, let me know. But a full third of them are laments. Okay, Dean's giving me the number. Put 1, 5. Oh, okay. All right. Thank you, Dean. About a third of them. Thank you, Dean. I need all the help I can get here. It's been a while since I've been in seminary. A full third of them are lament. And those are not the ones we tend to hear in our churches. It's certainly not the churches that I've been to and I'm going to. And why do we not hear them? Because we don't want to go there. And they have a distinct structure to them in the book Inside Out that we talked about before. It has a lament exercise that using the lament psalm, and there are 5 distinct structure. There's a 5-part structure, and it starts with praise, and then it's very, very raw. We have a big God. God can take it, right? And so my Psalms professor at Wesley called it complaining in faith to God. And so this taking the grief, your own personal grief, the grief for the country, your grief for the creation. I mean, we haven't talked about this, but it's very challenging out there. Not only are our social structures and our democracy at play, but our very earth, our home, it's being dismantled. And we can take that grief through a lament psalm. And I encourage groups to do this. And the most poignant, beautiful, raw, difficult, challenging lament psalms. And what that does, it does the same thing that it did for the psalm writers. Here it is. Here I am in the midst of this. But as all of you know, who've been to seminary or studied the Psalms, every single one of them, with 1 or 2 exceptions, they rail against God, they rail against their enemies. What does it always end with? Yeah, a praise and hope. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's a little weak-kneed, but it's yes and, or yes but. So one way to do this, Father Garrick, that we particularly like is we can do it individually, but also we divide the group up into parts, and we give each of them one aspect of the 5 pieces of the lament psalm. And again, it's in the book. I'm happy to send it to you. Send the group it. And then they work together, they work in their own little group to form the parts of this lament psalm, and then we read them together. So beautiful. So beautiful. That bargaining with God part, the praise part, the complaint part, it all just, it's it's the most beautiful thing. So that is a ritual that we do. But I think you're so right that what better place to lament the fate of our home earth than with earth. And we haven't talked about it, and we don't like to talk it much, but confession. We are, most all of us, I shouldn't make that. I am complicit. And many of us are complicit, and we not to bring forth guilt, but just to name that. I've been thinking a lot more about confession of late and the necessity of doing that, along with lament, with the woods, with the ocean, with the desert.
Beth, this is Brian Hersey. I thank you so much for your thoughts this evening. I have a sort of some things sometimes connect, and a neighbor of mine, friend of mine, had given me a little pamphlet written by Saint Alphonsus de Liguori, who my only knowledge of him is in connection with the Stations of the Cross. And but this little book that was given to my friend as a penance reading is actually quite good. Fortunately, it is reasonably short because it was quite dense. But one of the major premises in it is that we should be striving for a complete union of our wills with God's, where we kind of let our own egos and our own agendas get in the way. That's where problems arise, and that's pretty indisputable. But one of the things I thought about, given what you've eloquently talked about this evening, is the thought that nature does this inherently naturally. It is living out its reason for being in, at least my way of thinking, sort of complete accord with God's will for whatever it is. And so when we go out into nature, we can sort of see that process at work, and it can, if we're open to it, and it can potentially help us with that mission of ours in life. Thoughts of the group?
Well, I'll just respond, amen. People, I'm sorry, I'll let the group get in here. One of the things that I think is most stirring about the biblical testament in regard to the natural world is that there are passages where, I think it's in Isaiah, where the trees praise God. And so people say, oh, isn't that's a nice metaphor? Trees praise God. How do they praise God? By being the best darn tree they can be. You put it beautifully, Brian, by being what God intended her to be, and not trying to be something more, something different, something better. But what I have said, the words I just said many, many times, but I've never heard it the way you said it, which is we can go out into the world and see God's purposes just as God intended it to be. So I'm going to steal that. And now I'm going to go make a note of it and get muted so the rest of you can come in here. I think Brian wanted to know what the rest of the group thought of his insight.
Well, you stole my thunder. I was going to say the same thing you did, Beth, that I've been particularly fascinated by the nature psalms, the trees clapping their hands and the mountains flowing with milk and honey in terms of praising God by being who they are, yeah.
Oh, Father Garrick, I'm so sorry. I am a thunder stealer from way back. So
oh well, we'll provide mercy for you. Okay.
Ask Elizabeth, she'll help you out on that.
I happened to see a thread there in the comments on mercy. Beth, you had mentioned that human beings are the only ones in creation that strive. And how often do we talk about the paradox of being and doing? And how often do we assume that a doing is a striving? Makes me wonder about how much in our natural being is being done in our becoming who God is growing us to be. I was inspired by that with your observation, Brian. Thank you.
It's lovely, Dean. And how do you, back to the tree for a second, how do you reach for the light and not strive? So yes. It's okay to reach. Reaching without striving. Yeah. Sweet.
I'm going to butcher it, but it reminds me of out of the Gospels, like, do you look at the birds of the air? Do they worry about, I mean, obviously we need to worry about what we're going to eat the next day, but it is that same mindset of the grass and the birds, like how are they living, and they are not worrying about tomorrow. And I mean, that's a paradox we have to wrestle with because we are in a climate emergency, but how do we sit and be in it and take that wisdom presently rather than, you know, sense of worrying to be who we're going to be.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Elizabeth. A good reminder, those sparrows. Of course, I'm going to riff on that because Howard Thurman, that, you know, that saint mystic civil rights beacon, talked about, had this lovely sermon about the sparrow, or there's something I read, and I actually wrote a little article on that because he says that we talk about this as a metaphor, but what about the sparrow? We take it from our human perspective and said, well, the sparrow doesn't worry, so we shouldn't. And that's a great, appropriate message. At the root of that is God loves the sparrow. God loves the sparrow. Yeah. Howard Thurman, by the way, oh my goodness, he was a nature lover from all, and if you read his works, you'll see nature as a thread throughout it. Spent a lot of time in his boyhood home of Jacksonville. A lot of racist behavior toward him. Where did he go? He went to the ocean for peace, for consolation.
May I ask something? I went for a walk the other day when it was raining. And the thought occurred to me that that's the first time I've walked in nature in the rain for a long, long time. And even then I had a raincoat and heavy shoes. I tend to approach nature from a fairly romantic point of view because I go out in nature in good weather and I'm well clothed and shod. I'm not hungry, and I carry my water bottle with me. And I make things very easy for myself in nature. And that tempts me to think of nature in a somewhat romantic way. But all of us know that nature is red in tooth and claw, as they say. And I can imagine that some of the people in the groups that you take out are sensitive to the fact that there are predators and that there is a great deal in nature which looks for all the world like the strong dominating the weak, and or allowing the weak to die. And what I'm wondering is how do we incorporate nature as it really is? You know, that there is a great deal of competitiveness and might, just sheer power, dominating. How do we deal with that and then incorporate it into our spirituality in relation to nature? I'm not being very clear, but I think you might.
No, you're being very clear. I'm so glad you brought that up. Just an easy softball as we wrap up here. I'm awfully glad you brought that up, because it's important, as I said earlier, not to romanticize, to see nature who she is, and it is tooth and claw. And I saw right outside here a hawk take a little finch right off the top of it, and it was no fun for the finch. And so I think that we look at it honestly and openly. And I where I go with it, I don't understand why it needed to be that way. Whether you believe that God created it that way, or whether it evolved that way, or some combination thereof. But what I do know is that there's so much of God, spirit, mystery that I don't understand. And there's so much of our world that I don't understand. And so I can go to nature and look at the violence inherent in us as human beings, and hold it with the tooth and claw. I don't have, and if particularly our Hebrew scriptures really wrestle with what they often saw was the violent nature of God. And it allows, the natural world allows us to take our most difficult questions about the nature of humans, the nature of earth, the nature of God, out and say, what's with that? I will say, in nature's behalf, violence is rarely gratuitous. Not always. I think that one of the swans is apparently, very territorial, but generally they're eating to feed themselves, to feed their young. They're maintaining a territory for their own benefit. We've taken those concepts and we've magnified them quite a bit. But I think you raise a very, very good question, one that I'm absolutely not going to gloss over, because it's so very important that we struggle with that, all of us who love the natural world. And, we can talk about ticks and mosquitoes and the millions of people who've been affected by them. And so thank you for that question. It's a very good question. It's one that we should all be.
Thanks for what you said. Thank you.
I'd like to ask one in light of that. I'm curious about your thoughts on, oftentimes people call them dehumanizing metaphors, but the use of objectifying humanity or persons within humanity through metaphors of creatures, of other kin that we have. We've been open about the equality there here, but when it's leveraged towards objectification, I'm curious if that's a part of. I haven't contemplated that yet.
Yeah, I am aware of that. I know exactly, what you mean, and it goes both ways. He's a lion. He's a lion. I mean, you can both. I don't have too much to add to that from what you said. I think there are so many ways that we objectify, the natural world. In our eating practices. I mean, my family thinks that, that I'm very silly that at the dinner table when they're eating meat, I said, well, you really ought to thank the chicken, thank God and thank the chicken. And they're like, that's silly, but why not? And so there are ways that, of course, we have to eat, and there are various moral tendencies around that. But at the very least, we can be thankful and not dismiss. I think that's another way that it's not getting at exactly what you were asking, but it's another way that we objectify and lessen, demean. I think is what you're getting at. But we'll have to all watch ourselves with our, although there are, busy as a bee or those more positive ones, but he's a rat, Thank you. So this is, wow, what a group. I might have to sneak in here from time to time.
I think we're going to have to wrap up and honor our ending time. So do you want to wrap us up, Sam?
Sure. I just wanted to extend a very warm thank you to Beth for gracing us with your presence this evening and for sharing your wealth of wisdom in communion with the trees. If we could all give a warm Zoom round of applause and gratitude.
It's been a real honor and a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me, Sam.
Our pleasure. And we're really looking forward to reconvening on Monday, June 3rd at 7 p.m. Eastern, where we're going to be joined by Jim Robinson, who is a professor of religious studies at Iona College, where he is one of the directors of the Center for Earth and Spirit with Sister Kathleen Dagnan. So we're very excited to reconvene next month. Father Garrick, do you have anything else you'd like to share?
No, I think it's been a wonderful evening, and looking forward to you all continuing to journey with us on this contemplative ecology train that we've got out of the station tonight.
Absolutely. So thank you, everybody. Many blessings to you all, and may you have a peaceful rest of your evening. Thank you.
And Joy will send you a recording of the talk this evening.
Yes.
Blessings.
Blessings.